Windhager, Wood, inside 50. Wanganeen Miller! What a mark!
G'day and welcome to the GameDay Squad Aussie Rules Fantasy Show. I'm Haz, and today joining me to cover everything Aussie Rules this season is Pitty. And together we are the Fantasy Bros. We've partnered with GameDay Squad to bring you everything you need to know to succeed in this season's Aussie Rules competition. Pitty, how are you, mate?
I'm good, thanks, mate. It's good to be back. It's exciting to be recording this episode because we went to sit down and record this one on Monday night, but Dylan and Stu, our better halves here at the Fantasy Bros, they were in and recording the league show, and we just got kicked aside. So I'm excited to be talking about the Power and our Tigers and Saints, but yeah, I'll tell you what, I nearly jumped into their podcast and I was about to, just starting throwing around a few stats to do with some offloads and tackle meters or running meters, whatever they call it these days in rugby league. Shows you my knowledge of rugby league if I'm calling it that.
Yeah, you're definitely showing that you belong here on the AFL podcast and not over there with the NRL boys, that's for sure. But yeah, they certainly did kick us aside. The error message popped up, only one recording at a time because we all operate out of the same account, and you know, they just had to take precedent because they're the senior boys of the team. So we just had to sit back and postpone, and it seems like we've postponed nearly every night now. I'm meant to record on Monday, and here we are Thursday, finally getting around to it. I feel like I wrote everything for this show so long ago, I don't even know what I've written. So it's going to be a surprise as we go, and we'll see how everything goes from there.
Yeah, they're the best ones sometimes.
Yeah, that's it. So we are going to continue on with our team previews series. This is the fifth installment of our 6-team preview series. Pitty, can you tell our viewers what to expect from us across the preview series?
Yeah, as you mentioned there, mate, that's our fifth installment there for our team preview series. And we're going to be previewing all 18 AFL clubs by letting you know their key ins and outs, any positional changes from last season, what their primetime fixtures look like, who their under-22 guns are, and finally, who the must-have players are to target this season. There's also some pretty exciting pack opening competitions where the viewers, as always, can win some pretty special prizes. Don't forget as well to like and subscribe across all of our socials to keep up to date via @FantasyBrosAU on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Apple Music, and Spotify. So yeah, second last episode, mate, in this team preview series. Pretty exciting.
Yeah, it is pretty exciting. I am enjoying getting these team previews done and doing some deep dives into that data. And it's definitely something that you do not want to miss. If you are new to GameDay Squad, you can still sign up using the promo code FBAR26 in all capital letters to get 3 9-player common packs. Plus, you will also receive a stack of bronze cards to get your free-to-play AFL starter squad up and running. All right, mate, we've already talked about it. Let's jump straight into our 15 preview for the season. In this episode, we'll preview the Port Adelaide Power, the Richmond Tigers, and the St Kilda Saints. Do you want to start by running through how the Power went last season, what their primetime and Sunday fixtures look like for our new GDS competitions, and of course, what player movement has occurred over the off-season?
Yeah, of course. So for Port Adelaide, this is the year of the succession plan, wasn't it? 2025 was, sorry. Port finished 13th on the ladder with 9 wins and 14 losses, which was their worst record under Ken Hinkley, and a big drop-off, really, from a team that's regularly contending for finals. They were just another team who were plagued by injuries, though, throughout the season, particularly in their key defensive stocks. So that forced the club to use a number of new players throughout the year. And as a result, they just really struggled defensively and suffered some pretty heavy losses, which we know that's not typical of a Port Adelaide side, especially a side under Ken Hinkley. They also really missed Houston's drive off halfback, I thought. And remember, they actually ended up getting Rosie to play that role about halfway through the year. And 2025 marked that end for Ken Hinkley, the Ken Hinkley era, after 13 years at the helm. No premiership, despite a fantastic coaching career and coaching record. And we also saw Port veteran Travis Boak also hang up the boots and call it a day. What a stalwart he's been for that club as well. And keep in mind, they ended on a positive and emotional note as well with that gritty 4-point upset win over Gold Coast in the final round at Adelaide Oval, off the back of a clinical Butters and Rosie performance, laying a really strong foundation for 2026 as Josh now takes the keys to the car. So as you can see there in the primetime fixtures, they feature 3 times up until round 15, and they feature 4 times in those Sunday time slots in the FantasyBros Sunday Showdown, which is about average for both of those special competitions. So you still want to be playing them, of course, and looking to have some cards ready to go for those competitions. especially in some of those players we're going to talk about soon on that next slide. In terms of their under 22 eligible players, not too many. I've listed a few there of the more notable ones. Joe Berry as a forward, probably not selecting him, I would imagine, but a name I would put in there. Logan Evans is probably one of the ones I like out of all the Port youngsters, as it is available as a defender. I think from memory, his average is just under 60 GDS points. So again, it's not amazing, but I really like that silky left footer there in Logan Evans. And I think he could be a really good ball user for the Power down the track. So one to have a look at, see what cards you have of him. And Christian Moraes as well as a midfielder. In terms of their key outs, they did lose a few this off-season. So Rory Atkins, one of the more, fantasy names we've talked about in the past for various reasons. After coming over from the Gold Coast, he's retired. Travis Boak, as we mentioned before as well, club champion, he's retired. Ryan Burton, he was delisted. Jeremy Finlayson, he was delisted. And Willie Rioli Jr. as well, also retired. In terms of their key ints, they brought in Will Brodie from Fremantle, Corey Durden from Carlton, and Jacob Ware from GWS. And in terms of their position changes, the one big one to talk about, probably one of the biggest positional changes this offseason, you could probably have Petrarca and Sheasel in that conversation as well. But yeah, Connor Rozee, they're one of their all-star from last season, picking up that defender status, which is just, again, it's probably one of those almost those cheat codes that we talk about with your Harry Sheasel, for example. The fact we can pick Rozee as a defender this year is very, very exciting. What are you thinking looking at that, mate?
Yeah, I think you pretty much nailed it on the head. They were a little bit underwhelming last season. Obviously, we've known Port to be that perennial finals contender that always is in and around the finals mix. Made prelim finals for probably 4 out of the last 6 years, but never really seemed to crack that grand final. And yeah, unfortunately, Ken Inkley's time has come to an end. And like you said, Josh now has the keys to the car, and it's going to be exciting to see what he can do with the list, because I think they do have a pretty good list. And as you mentioned, it's led by those two in Connor Rozee and Zach Butters. Sometimes they might struggle to have some contributors outside of those two. And if oppositions can find some ways to shut down those two, which I'm sure we'll talk about probably throughout the episode as the two main people to target for opposition teams, then they potentially do struggle to get going. And like you mentioned, they really lifted in that last game for Ken Hinkley to round out the season. But I think it's going to be the addition of Will Brodie, who's probably gone a little bit forgotten in the GDS community and AFL world. Obviously, he had a couple good seasons over there at Fremantle, but just seemed to fall out of favour with the midfield mix that they have with obviously Brayshaw, Sarong and Young, and then obviously Murphy Reed coming through as well. So be interesting to see how he adds to their midfield dynamic and whether or not Connor Rozee, moves back to that halfback flank like you mentioned, or whether he remains in the midfield. And no doubt we'll probably talk about that at depth throughout the episode.
Yeah, and it probably leads us nicely into those key talking points around the fantasy relevant players and positions based on last season's starter. So again, thanks to DFS Australia, we've gathered data on each team's market share of fantasy points, who's attending the most centre bounces for them, and of course those kick-in statistics as well, which can tell us a lot about some good defender picks. So what did this data look like for the Power in 2025?
Yeah, so as we can see on the screen there, the fantasy market share for the Power was led by Connor Rozee. He had 7.1% of the Port's market share last season, followed closely by his partner in crime, and Zach Butters at 7%. And there's a bit of a drop-off from Butters to Ollie Wines at third position, who was 6.2%. And then big ruckman Jordan Sweet comes in at 5.6%. And then the Hornbag, Jason Horne-Francis at 5.5%. Rounding out there, probably the most relevant fantasy players or GDS players for Port Adelaide. Obviously, we can see there that Travis Boak has retired. And he averaged the 5.2% of their fantasy market share last year in ninth spot. And then their CBAs, we can see that their primary ruckman Jordan Sweet attended 80% of their CBAs, and then Zach Butters was their clear number one midfielder last season with 77% of their CBAs, followed by Willem Drew, which I think is actually a little bit interesting to see that he is the second highest CBA percentage attendee last season for the Power, followed by Ollie Wines, Dante Visitini, who was their backup ruckman, Jason Horne-Francis, and then Connor Rozee rounding out. And then the interesting one there is Miles Bergman at 9 with 28%. And then if we move into our kick-in and play-on percentages, so our kick-in monopoly, Kane Farrell led those kick-ins for the Power last season after Dan Houston's exit. He took 97 of those kick-ins for the year, and he played on 98% of the time. So you're nearly guaranteed every time he gets the ball in his hands, he's going to play on, and he does have that booming left foot that can easily travel 60 meters without even trying by the looks of things. Just seems to time the ball so well off that left foot of his. And then the interesting one that we've already kind of mentioned, Connor Rozee, with that move to halfback last season, had the 56 kick-ins. And as we love, he played on 100% of the time. So he's getting +4 points every time he plays on out of that goal square to take that kick-in, which obviously, probably led to him finishing high up in that season averages and getting himself that all-star card with that move down to halfback at the end of last season. And then followed by Josh Sin and Ryan Burton, who has been delisted this season. And then it's pretty much an even spread of a couple of people that just like to pick up the crumbs there at Port Adelaide. Is there anything that really stands out to you, mate?
Probably two key things for me. I think one of those things is just the fact that Connor Rozee and Zach Butters are clearly their two best players, and you said they're likely to be two people that opposition teams target on a weekly basis, or particularly those teams that might look to use a tag. They look to try and shut down a Rozee or a Butters. It's more often Butters sometimes, but I think they're also the two players that ourselves as GDS coaches look to target quite frequently as well. And the fact that Connor Rozee is now a defender, it makes picking both of them a bit you might feel a little bit more comfortable about it. They're not sort of both taking up a midfield spot. One's in the back line, one's in the midfield. Just might make you feel a little bit, feel a little bit better picking both of those on some weeks. But yeah, I guess with that as well, in terms of Zach Butters, he's one that's, again, probably just looking really good this season, and he's just an absolute jet. And one reason I'm probably really keen on him to start this season as well is just the fixture that Port have. I don't know if you've had a chance to have a bit of a look at it just yet, but they play Kangaroos, Essendon, West Coast, and Richmond in their first 4 games of the season. That is going to be, absolute bloodbath, isn't it? Like, I expect Butters basically to start this season with the biggest of bangs, and I think there's every chance that he's going to be our highest averaging midfielder after these 4 rounds. And I also believe there's a bit of a narrative where, Port can start this season in red-hot form under Josh Carr as the new senior coach, and then they might start to regress a little bit as that season progresses. We can sometimes see this with, we see this surge of improvement under a new coach, which can take over sometimes, and I can see that sort of happening, and it'll be off the back of Zach Butters. But the one little flag I have that I thought I'd mention that all GameDay squad coaches need to be aware of is that, and I feel like a lot of them probably are, but the fact that he can be tagged out of a game pretty convincingly, especially when they come up against the Cats, which they do in round 7. So write that down now and make sure you don't play him. Because in his last 3 games against the Cats, I don't know if you've had a look at this data. I just put it in quickly, but he averaged across 3 games, his last 3 against the Cats, just 42 GDS points. Mm-hmm. So to be clear, these are scores of 40, 56, and 31. And scarily, in those 3 games, he only managed 1 single mark across all 3, which is a stark contrast to his typical 5, 6, 7, or 8 marks a game that he gets. So I love Zach Butters, one of my favourite players. There's no one better, I think, to watch play a game than Zach Butters, just how hard he attacks the footy, but he can also play so well on the outside. But he could just get shut down so quickly, particularly by Ocean Mullen from the Cats.
Yeah, that is scary, that tag. Those stats do tell a big story there, that up against Geelong and like you said, any team that is looking to tag, Butters does become a very scary play every week. But if we're looking at those easy matchups, and especially those first 4 rounds, oh man, that you couldn't get an easier run to start the season than those 4 weeks. So I think you're right. I think we are lock and loading on Zach Butters to start the season, regardless of, even if there is a potential tag against those teams. I think he can power through that because they are just juicy matchups for midfielders.
Who would anyone go to him? I don't really see a tag coming. Like Durham might sit on him, but I don't know if that's going to be a tag like from the Bombers.
Well, that's it. we obviously don't know what teams might be experimenting with over the off season, and they might just throw a left field one out there, knowing that they do have one early in the season against Zach Butters, and they know that he can be susceptible to that tag. So maybe it is something that teams might look forward to now, and they might try and pre-plan a little bit and try and experiment with a couple of different players in there to stop him and quell that influence that he has. Because, yeah, he averaged 27 disposals last year, 3.5 marks, 5 tackles, and he contributed a couple of goals as well. So he knows how to hit the scoreboard. He knows how to rack up the points in those games where he's able to just run free, and he can definitely have a ceiling game when he's given the opportunity to. So,
oh yeah,
definitely one that, like, I think you nailed it on the head. It's one that we should be targeting to start the season, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think the other key thing, just in terms of this slide here that we're sort of looking at, is I just think that the fact they've got that new coach, when we get a new coach in, sometimes where it's a bit of a wait and watch, like they can actually change up the game plan a little bit, like their game style might shift. We see role changes, new personnel. So I think it'll be interesting to see how they line up in round one and what that team looks like. I just feel that we might see a few changes potentially at Port Adelaide that we'll have to keep a bit of an eye on. And one there you mentioned, one of the ins from Fremantle is Will Brodie. So he's come in there, and I guess if you're looking at it too, you know, he's been added, but he actually knows Josh Carr quite closely from his time at Freo, and it was a big reason as to why, like, he's now found himself at Port Adelaide. And in terms of a prospect for GDS, I don't sort of mind him, to be fair, just pending what that role is in the first couple of weeks. I'm not sure if it'll be a really long-term thing throughout the year, but we'll just have to wait and see, I guess. But just keep in mind that he hasn't played a senior game of footy since round 7 of the 2023 season. So, you know, he's been playing the last 2.5 years in the waffle for Peel Thunder. But the thing you've also got to remember is that he was a fantasy relevant player in his time at Freo, as you said, when Josh Carr was the midfield coach. And he's actually a good player. Like in his last full season, which was 2022, and coincidentally, that's the first year he had at the Dockers after being traded from the Suns, which I find interesting, but that's a bit of a side note. Will Brodie, he averaged 108.4 GDS points in his first season at Freo, and that was thanks to being basically the number 2 midfielder at the Dockers with 68% centre bounce attendances for the season. That was just ahead of Sarong and Mundy. Now, I'll emphasise, Josh Carr was his midfield coach at that time. So somewhere along the line, he fell out of favour with JL, and they just didn't see him as being a guy that can take the Dockers to finals footy. But if we look at the 2026 season, in terms of the power, he's now over here. It's interesting that Ollie Wines, who comes in terms of their midfielders as their number 3 midfielder, apologies. If you look at the CBAs there, he gets 55% CBAs, just behind Willem Drew and Zach Butters. He's actually missing the first 2 rounds due to suspension. So he'll be out. There's no guarantee either that Hornbag plays like big minutes early. I'm not sure how Horn Francis has been tracking this preseason, whether he's had a really good preseason or if he's still sort of being managed a bit. I'm not quite sure. So I don't know what his midfield time will look like. But I'm sort of expecting that somebody else will get this big role change. And there's every chance that Will Brodie could find himself running through the midfield in round 1, wearing teal and screaming, "Never tear us apart." And if he does, he could be a sneaky little pod play, and maybe one to look at for a special competition as well. Just, something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, great pod, I reckon. And like you said, it's definitely one that we should be keeping an eye on for our special competitions because, you know, he can score well if given the opportunity. Like you said, he averaged that 108.4 GDS points, and that was thanks to an average of 11 kicks, 15 handballs, 2 tackles, and 2 marks and 5 tackles. So he does know how to rack up some points when given that opportunity, and it's probably a CBA reliant role. I don't know how well he'll score if he was to play on a wing or in another position, but I think you're right. I think they've got to look to try and change up that mix. Ollie Wines isn't getting any younger. Obviously, I know he's still the bull in there, and obviously I mentioned that Willem Drew does to surprise me how much midfield time he still gets. Obviously, probably their big midfielder. So I think they'll look to bring Brodie in as a bit of a point of difference in that midfield this season and look to change some things up. And especially if they're going to still plan on playing Connor Rosie at halfback, which I think from all reports is the plan. He's been training there most of the preseason. So they need to replace Rosie in the midfield as well. So it's got to come from somewhere, and they brought him across from Fremantle pretty much for nothing. I think it was a 7th round draft pick. So it might be one of the steals of the season.
Yeah, we'll just have to keep an eye on it, hey, because there's somebody else who I think might be able to run through the midfield a little bit that I really like. And speaking of, we've just covered a whole bunch of those fantasy relevant players from that 2025 data. So let's now take a look at who our Fantasy Bros picks are for this season, where we each pick one player from the power that we're keen on or interested in for the upcoming season. Who have you got? Talk us through it.
All right, I know I'm probably taking the easy option here, but Connor Rosie, he was Port's highest averaging player last season. He did finish 10 points clear of Zach Butters, and he's just an absolute joy to watch. He makes footy look simple, and he almost always uses the ball the right way. And as we mentioned a little bit earlier, he does have that positional change from midfielder to defender in GameDay squad this season, which makes Rosie one of the most intriguing premium defender options this year. He averaged that elite 125.3 GDS points in 2025, finishing as the 4th best midfielder behind premium scorers Dawson, Bontempelli, and Nick Dacos, and the 9th best player in GDS of all of last season. So that output represented a strong jump on his 2024 average of 114.5 GDS points, highlighting another clear step forward in that scoring profile of his. He's had a noticeable role shift across the season, spending significant time at halfback flank as Port's primary ball distributor after the exit of Dan Houston. And I think that was probably out of necessity. They were really struggled to move that ball out of that back line. And as you mentioned, they had some significant defeats to start the year. And I think that was just purely because they could not get that ball out of the back line, and they didn't have the elite silky skills really outside of Kane Farrell. So they had to change something up, and they just knew that Connor Rosie, being a skipper, with that elite ball use of his, he just needed to go back there and change the way they played coming out of defense. And I think that role really reflected in his numbers. So with just the 35% CBA attendances on average for the season, which was well down on his partner in crime, Zach Butters' 77%. He still had 4 games over 75% CBAs and a further 6 games over 50% CBAs. So we can't just assume that he's going to play predominantly as a defender this season, as we kind of already mentioned. In Port's match sim last week, Rosie did play in the midfield, but he also did line up at halfback to start the game, which could be a sign of things to come. And he's trained with the defenders for most of the preseason, as I mentioned. So it might be like they're looking to continue that role, at least for the start of the season. And last season, he took full advantage of that halfback role, recording those 56 kick-ins and playing on 100% of the time, as I mentioned earlier. And it's just obviously something that we love as GDS coaches, just 3 points. And he was statistically rock solid. He averaged 17 kicks, 9 handballs, 4 marks, and 3.5 tackles, while also kicking 11 goals, showing that ability to push up the ground and impact the scoreboard, obviously allowing him to have a bit of a ceiling as well, which obviously coaches love. So he's reliable. He has that ceiling, and he doesn't have a really low floor like Zach Butters. Doesn't seem to get the tag as much as his partner in crime does. So I think his all-star card will be locked into my team pretty much all season. I'll be playing him in as many competitions as I can because he is an absolute gun.
Have you got his all-star card?
I do.
Oh, mate, this is not fair. What am I doing?
I'm just rubbing it in now, mate. I just know you don't have one.
Yeah, I think there's only one left too from memory. I think I saw the 19th one got packed today. So the hunt is on for number 20, but I'm not sure I'll get there, unfortunately.
All right. Who are you?
But yeah,
Sorry, mate, you go.
No, I was just going to say I love that pick of Connor Rosie, and I think you've summed him up absolutely perfectly. And I like the idea that you mentioned that he does have a higher floor and he's a little bit safer than a Zach Butters, for example. But yeah, I'm very interested to see what Port Adelaide do this season, and more importantly, what Josh Carr has in plan. And it's not just Rosie, but it's everyone else where they're going to play. And I just feel like at times, potentially, if the game's not going their way, or if the season starts to take a bit of a different turn to what they expected, I could see some players, including Rosie, maybe moving into a different position as well. We'll just have to wait and see. But speaking of that, probably makes my man nice and relevant, Miles Bergman. I like Miles Bergman this season. In fact, he really does excite me in terms of what he can do. I feel like he's not as risky as a Will Brodie. I feel like that's a very spicy pick, Will Brodie, with potential upside, of course, if he can play and have a good role. But I feel like Bergman, because we've seen it before, we've seen him go through the midfield, just feels like a bit more of a safer play for me. But the thing is that he's available as a defender in game day squad. And there's been lots of talk this preseason of him training with the midfield group and looking to potentially be a key cog in their rotation, not just running through, but one of the main men running through their midfield and driving that for the power. Bergman, that is, he finished 9th last season in terms of centre bounce attendances for the power, but he still put up a really healthy average of 92.5 GDS points. We would like more, don't get me wrong, but that's not bad at all considering that we expect some more upside this season. We actually got to see him in this expected role change last year at times. So when Horne-Francis was out of the side with injury and Rosie had his role changed to halfback, it was really clear that Bergman got the nod to run through the guts when those changes occurred. And it bumped up his CBAs as high as 82%, 89%, and 83% in some games. And funnily enough, we talk about centre bounces, and why do we talk about that data on the previous slide? Well, because this directly translated to his scoring. He put up scores of 104, 121, and 145 GDS points in these games. I'm specifically referring to rounds 9, 16, and 19 here. But there were many other examples where his scoring was just as good, particularly through that period of time. And the other thing to keep in mind with Bergman's score is that he doesn't rely on possessions alone to have a really good score. He will typically have a really high kick-to-handball ratio. And then he'll also have a large number of marks and tackles in his scoring profile to access a really high ceiling score, which could make him a juicy pod for our squads if coaches aren't quick to catch on to this new role change for Bergman. And again, he's in our backlines. So with a favourable role change for Bergman looking likely this season and a fresh face leading the power backing him in, I rate what he can do this season, both in terms of football and from a game day squad perspective.
Yeah, love the shout. I think Bergman is probably going to be the player that if Rosie does go to halfback, like you said, it kind of correlated from last season that Rosie goes to halfback, Bergman gets thrown in the midfield, and it doesn't seem like they both tend to play with each other a whole lot. So it's going to be interesting to see who does get that, obviously that midfield time out of the two, and who's going to make the form that key partnership with Zach Butters and maybe potentially Will Brodie and Ollie Wines in that midfield. Obviously, you can't forget Jason Horne-Francis as well. So they do have plenty of options to run through there, and it's just going to be interesting to see what they roll out with early in the season and who's going to be that big scorer that we're looking for. But Bergman could be a very good pod in those couple of primetime fixtures and 4 Sunday Showdown fixtures that they've got as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, that brings us to the end of our Port Adelaide preview, mate, as much as Cal would probably like us to talk a little bit longer. But we're going to now preview the Richmond Tigers. So do you want to run us through how they went last season, what their special comp summary looks like, and what the key player movement and positional changes were for this upcoming season?
Yeah, of course. So 2025 marked another transition year for Richmond as the club continued to move on from its premiership core and invest heavily in youth and that list regeneration. While results were inconsistent and finals were never really a realistic expectation, the Tigers used the season to define some roles and expose that young talent that they went out and targeted in the 2024 draft. On the field, Richmond struggled to sustain 4 quarter performances, particularly against the top 8 opposition, and their ball movement often showed some promise, but breakdowns in defensive transition and contested consistency really hurt them, especially late in games. And then obviously as well, injuries and inexperience across their key position players further limited their ability to build momentum across the season. Obviously, Tom Lynch missed a significant period through injury and then suspension. Noah Bolter had to go through his suspension protocol or legal, whatever you want to call it, restrictions on the games that he could play. And then obviously as well, Josh Gibcus, who they've had high expectations and high hopes for a lot of pretty much since he got drafted, and unfortunately just keeps getting injured. They were all out and they really just struggled across those key position stocks, and they had to rely on Harry Armstrong and Jonty Fall up in the forward line to really carry that load. But I guess the highlight of their season was in their round 1 upset over the Blues in a game that I think had the AFL world just stunned. No one expected them to win that game going into the first game of round 1. and they just pulled it out of nowhere, and pretty much everything just came off for them. And obviously, Seth Campbell sealed it with a big backflip to put an exclamation point on that round 1 win. And they also managed to upset the Suns under the roof at Marvel in round 6, in another sign that the young core has the potential to compete against some quality opposition. As we know, the Suns managed to make finals this year, so that just shows that they do have some serious talent on their list, and once everything kind of comes together, they'll be in a good spot in years to come when that everyone gets that experience. While the latter position ultimately reflected a rebuilding list, the Tigers gained clarity on what works and probably more what doesn't, and where their list priorities lie moving forward. And the season may not be remembered for wins and losses. Obviously, we can see there on the screen they had the 5 wins and the 18 losses, but it laid more important groundwork for their next phase, obviously, of their rebuild, rather than delivering that immediate success that they're probably looking for as a fan base. So more looking into their special comps now, they have the 3 primetime fixtures this season, but they're probably not really a team that we're going to look to target in those, because they just don't really have the big GDS scoring players this season, probably outside of Tim Taranto and maybe an Curvis if you're looking for a bit of a pod in your ruck line. And they do have the 6 FantasyBros Sunday Showdown allocations up until round 15, which is the 5th most Sunday time slots for the competition. And the under 22 eligible players, we could pretty much name their whole entire list. I think they're nearly all under 22. Seth Campbell has forward status. Steely Green is also a forward. Taj Houghton, who is one I'm a little pretty keen on this year, forward status. Obviously, number 1 draft pick, Sam Layla. Kane McAuliffe in the midfield. Josh Smiley, who I'm excited to just see hit the park, because he did have really high hopes last year and obviously didn't play through injury. So really excited to see what another preseason can do for him. And then obviously Luke Traynor down in that back line as well. And then just some player movement. So their key outs, Jacob Bauer has been delisted, Thompson Dow has been delisted, and Camden McIntosh, the stalwart of the Tigers and the premiership era, has also been delisted. And then obviously the key ins, they didn't really bring anyone in through trade, but they more just targeted that draft to continue their rebuild. And they got pick 7, Sam Cumming, and number 8 pick, Sam Greige, or I think that's right, Greige. And
Grill,
then
I think.
Grill, there we go. My apologies. And then notable position changes for season 2026, Sam Layla now does have forward status, which makes him a very interesting selection, especially for our under 22 competition. There's a lot to get through there, mate, but is there anything that stands out to you for the Tigers this season?
Yeah, a couple of things. Sam Grill, I think BT is going to struggle to call his name in the commentary. And you said that not many tipped Richmond to win that round 1 game. I don't think, there are a lot of people who probably didn't tip them to win a game all season. So the fact they came out and they won that game, but then put another 4 wins on the board for the season, they were, they looked really competitive for, times throughout that season. And yeah, they played a really exciting brand of footy for the most part, obviously still learning with a really young core. I think they're a very exciting team for looking into the future. But yeah, probably not too much else to add there. I think you summed it up quite nicely. And yeah, I'm loving that Sam Lawler now has forward status as well.
Perfect. Well, that leads us into our key talking points around the fantasy relevant players and positions based on last season's data. Pitty, do you want to start by talking through the key fantasy data for the Tigers in 2025?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can see there on screen, we have at our market share, you mentioned Tim Taranto before as being someone we might want to look at in those primetime competitions. He was their best scorer at the Tigers for last season, and probably has been for the last couple. He had contributed 6.7% of his team scoring. Toby Nankervis as well, the other man you mentioned, Big Ruckman, he comes in at second, followed by the likes of some familiar names we've seen before in Jaden Short and Jacob Hopper. But one that some coaches may not have caught on to, I know some have, but some may not have. Sam Banks rounds out that top 5 in terms of that fantasy market share, and what a player he's shaping up to be, isn't he? He's a very exciting prospect. And then again, probably a few more familiar names sort of coming in that bottom 5 of the 10, you could call it. Human Meatball, Dion Prestia in 6th, and Nick Flosson in 7th. So Yeah, some familiar names there throughout and a couple other ones in there. In terms of the CBAs as well, the top two from the market share are the top two that attend their centre bounces as well. So Toby Nankervis and Tim Taranto, they attend 83% and 81% respectively. So you could effectively say almost all of their CBAs or very close to it. Both of them are at the source, followed by Jacob Hopper as well. He's in there just as much as Tim Taranto is. They really do see them as probably their two best midfielders, but obviously Jacob Hopper has just had a few issues with injury and keeping fit over the past few seasons. I haven't checked his number of games played last year. I felt like last year he played more games than he has done previously, but that's just a gut feel and not actually checking that number of games played. Dion Prestia there is the third midfielder essentially, and in a similar vein to Jacob Hopper again, has probably struggled with fitness at times across the last couple of seasons. But when he is playing, he commands about 70%, close to that in terms of his market share. And then an interesting name, I hadn't heard of this one a lot, I can't lie, Kane McAuliffe. And then when I looked at his numbers, he actually scores quite well, which we might even have a look at that too. Like he's in our under 22s, isn't he, from memory, Kane McAuliffe?
He is in our under 22s. I definitely think we'll probably be talking about him come out under 22 rankings episode, because from memory, he finished quite high up in the eligible under 22 midfielder rank. So I think we might leave that one for now, but I think it is a great one to flag for a potential discussion later in our preseason preview series.
Yeah, just as a little spoiler to come and tune in, he is in the top 5 midfielders if you look at that competition, and we can't wait to share more of those players. And I know you are, Haz, but I definitely am really keen to be ranking those under 22 players because I think that's such an exciting competition, and I know that man will feature. In terms of the kick-ins, though, we have Nick Vlauston and Sam Banks as the number 1 and number 2 players in terms of kick-ins. But really, I guess it's Nick Vlauston who takes the most, isn't it? He takes 87 kick-ins for his team. Sam Banks at second, he takes 48. Jaden Short is third with 42. And they're one of those teams that probably share that around a little bit. And I guess that speaks to maybe where they're at with their development. They don't have that. I mean, I thought it would have been Jaden Short as their designated ball user, but it did shift a little bit last year, and Sam Banks really took a bit of that on. But yeah, they do share that around a little bit in terms of the kick-in statistics there. Anything else that stands out to you that I haven't touched on there, mate?
No, nothing really that you haven't touched on. I just quickly had a look at Jacob Hopper. So he did play all games last year, played all 23 games, but you're right. You're looking back to 2024. He played all 23 games. Yep. So he didn't miss any. And then in 2024, he played 12. 2023 16 and 2022 7. So yeah, he managed to get through a full season for the first time in 4 years last year, which probably shown in that data there that he was pretty reliable when fit. He averaged the 98 points for GDS, and then obviously he's the equal highest CBAs like midfielder wise for the Tigers. And I think you're right, it's pretty much Taranto and Hopper, and then whoever else can really round out that midfield, because that's the two they see in there all the time, and they don't really have any role outside of that team as an inside midfielder. So yeah, it's good to see him get through another season, and hopefully, who knows, another preseason under his belt. If he can steer clear of those injuries, it might be a good pod in some potential primetime fixtures or Sunday showdowns to come this season. Sam Banks, I'm not going to talk too much about him just yet, but I think we'll talk about him a little bit later. But I think you're right. I think coaches might be underestimating the jump that he had last season and potentially the jump that he might have again this year. Obviously, we can see that he's second in their kick-ins and fifth in their fantasy market share. So I think he will have another big year this year as one of their primary ball movers down the back line.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, that actually genuinely surprises me about Jacob Hopper. I don't know if that short. Again, I'm absolutely shocked. I had him in a keeper league, and yeah, I could have sworn he did not play all games, but he has so much talent too. Like, I think he definitely wouldn't have been at his best with that 98 average. I think there's every chance he could pump out a few C-League scores this season if he does stay fit.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I have a couple of his diamonds, so who knows, that might be sneaky little pod plays in those special competitions. if he can get up and fit for the season and we see some potential scoring output increase for him. So who knows? I highly doubt it. I don't think I'll probably put myself in a position to play a Jacob Hopper, but who knows? We never know what's going to happen, and he might come out and put us in a position where we must play him in those competitions. I'm definitely not looking to target him in a standard competition. That's for sure. However, we have covered a whole bunch of fantasy relevant players based on 2025. Who are you keen on or interested in for the season 2026?
Yeah, mate, I'm so keen to be talking about none other than Dustin Martin. Hang on. Sorry, no, Sam Lawler. My bad. They just look so similar. Can you see that 22 there on that player card there, Has?
Should be 4.
That is going to be 4. That's going to flick over to 4 soon. He's had that favourable number change over the offseason, which speaks to how highly the Tigers rate this young kid if they're prepared to hand over that number 4 to him. And the reasons why I want to talk about Sam Law, though, it probably boils down to 3 things. One is the fact that he is eligible for our under-22s competition. So that immediately makes him an attractive card to own outside of the whole dynasty element of our game. And the second reason is that he's available as a forward in GameDay squad for the 2026 season. Big tick. And lastly, I actually think that we could see some improvement in his scoring his second season in the system. Last year, he easily passed the eye test. He looked incredible up forward for the Tigers, often hitting the scoreboard. And then he would roll through the middle for some impact and burst as well, sort of playing some midfield time. This may not be reflected in his season average, which was only the 61.9 GDS points across 11 games. He did have some issues with his hamstrings. But keep in mind, he did have a couple of decent scores in there as well that we would love to field in our under-22s forward line this year. So in rounds 4 and 10, he was able to put up some scores of 106 and 90 GDS points respectively. In each of those games, it was his ability to hit the scoreboard for 2 goals that enabled him to crack or get near that ton. And interestingly, he actually kicked a goal in 7 out of his 11 games last season. And in his last game, that was when he was injured very early on. So he only managed 3% time on ground in that last game, which means you could effectively say that, you know, he's kicking snags in 7 out of 10 games. So 70% of games he plays, he's kicking goals based off last year's data. Now, it's this dangerous threat that he poses around goal that I really like, on top of the other points raised earlier. And considering he's put in some really good work this preseason, I can see him improving his average and being a really handy option for that under-22 forward line this season. I do also think that Richmond will want to throw him around the ball a little bit more because he's easily one of the most talented players on their list. And I would say, if not the most talented player. I know they have big hopes for him, and he looks fit. If you've seen some of the highlights Richmond have put out, he genuinely looks like Dustin Martin. You've got to do a bit of a double take. So I think he's one that I'm really keen to watch this season and hopefully plug in our forward lines for the under-22s comp.
Dustin Martin without the tats, I think they're calling him.
I like that. That's a good one.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. Sam Lawler is an absolute gun. Obviously, we know he went number 1 in his draft class, and he just has that X-factor game-breaking ability. Obviously, we saw it in round 1 as well against Carlton, where he managed to kick a couple of big snags on the big stage in front of 80,000. So he's definitely not shy to put those big performances in front of a big crowd when it matters the most. And obviously, Richmond supporters are probably one of the most faithful in the competition, and they get the support down to the MCG regardless of how they're going. So he'll love to put on a show for that supporter base. I think he's going to improve on his average this season, and especially as a forward in our under-22 competition. Like you mentioned, he really did struggle with injury last season. He had that jaw injury from the preseason matches against West Coast, where Ruben Jinby just accidentally caught him high, which saw him break his jaw. Right. And then he had obviously those hamstring issues that you talked about. So if he can get a full preseason under his belt, and like you said, he already looks fit and firing in those little clips that we've seen out on social media. So lock and load Sam Lawler in your under-22 forward lines this season, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah. Now, Sam Banks, I'm very, very keen on him as well, mate. Talk to me about him.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad we kind of glossed over it a little bit earlier, and we didn't touch on him too much, because I do think that Sam Banks shapes as one of the biggest winners from Richmond's ongoing rebuild, with that increased opportunity and responsibility opening up across halfback. last season, and he certainly took it with both hands, that's for sure. And I think moving into this season, I think they're probably going to look for him to be their number one ball distributor in the back line. He made a significant scoring jump in 2025, averaging the 94.73 GDS points. And that was a massive increase from just the 52 GDS points in 2024. So he's had a 44 point jump from season to season, showing clear growth with that expanded role across halfback, and obviously some more ball in his hands and more trust in his ability. His 2025 season averages were solid. He averaged the 14 kicks, 7 handballs, 4.5 marks, and 2 tackles. And he proved to be a trusted ball user coming out of the defensive 50. They do like to have the ball in his hands because he likes to take the game on and he doesn't die wondering. Often he'll accumulate those touches in a variety of ways, either behind the ball or he'll try and link up in transition, get to the handball off the mark and use his speed and agility to break the lines. And I think that's what Richmond really like with his ball use coming out of the back line. And I think that trust is reflected in his kick-in numbers. He's taken the 48 kick-ins for the season and he played on 92% of the time, providing a reliable scoring base. But I think I'm actually predicting that he becomes their main kick-in distributor this season, taking over from Nick Vlaston. I think they're going to look to try and get the ball in Banks' hands as much as possible. And obviously we know some other players in the comp look to give that short play on, give that 45, get the handball back, and, they're outside 50 already. I think that Banks has the potential to be one of those players to really break those lines for Richmond and try and really drive that ball movement this season. So, yeah, I am expecting him to take over from Short, Vlaston, and Broad, who are all on the wrong side of 30. And with another full preseason and improving that fitness level and having that clearly defined role, he has genuine upside for a potentially career best season to better his 40-point improvement from 2024, which if there's anything to go by, we can expect another scoring increase from Banks this season. And I'll be looking to lock him in our back lines for the Tigers primetime and FantasyBros Sunday Showdown fixtures in the hope that he can average over 100 points this season and really look to target potentially some good matchups and chase a ceiling score.
Yeah, no doubt. Again, he's one that I'm super keen on as well, and I'm really glad you did talk about him because he is such an exciting prospect. Just as you were talking there too, I was just having a look at some of his data because you mentioned that like his jump in average. I don't like it when players have such a big jump in average, but this one, I guess you can sort of put down to that clear role change. Like if you go back through his data, he was actually playing a lot through 2024. First of all, he wasn't in the side for the whole season. He was sort of in the reserves and then in seniors. But he was actually sub a fair bit, and he was also playing on the wing. Whereas as soon as you look at 2025, where he actually sort of got that consistent halfback position, his scoring was also reflective of that consistency. So I really like that, and I do agree. I think they need the ball in his hand back there. I think he looks really good. I'm just interested why they maybe have gone away from Jaden Short or maybe opted to use Banks more than Short. Can they use them both? That's just one little question I've got.
Yeah, and that's probably, I guess, Short's probably done nothing wrong because he has been their primary distributor in the back line. Maybe it is injuries, maybe it is age, and maybe they are trying just to prepare for the future in this rebuild, and they're trying to, give some opportunities to some younger players. And I think Banks, like I said, took that with both hands. And if he's going to look to play anything like last season, I think that'd be silly to try and take that away and give it back to a more experienced veteran when they're trying to just be a young side that is rebuilding for the future where Short, Vlaston and Broad probably aren't going to be there. So I think Banks needs to be pushed forward again this season by Richmond, and hopefully that can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we'll jump into the Saints, mate, as well. We'll preview them. They're our last team to look at for this episode, our second last installment in this team preview series. So the Saints, they ended up finishing 12th on the ladder last season with 9 wins and 14 losses. It was a bit of a disappointing year again, unfortunately. That Saints fans, I'm sure they would have been hoping for more. They debuted a number of new players throughout the year as well, so which again, it probably speaks to where their list is truly at. We saw some promising young players as well with some immense talent play a number of games, such as Max Hall, Toby Travalia, Hugh Boxall, Alex Taru, the Viking. So this was probably reflective again of their midfield group at times as well throughout the year. We saw this variance throughout their midfield potentially. We saw some new players go through there a little bit, such as Hugo Garcia. Wang played a more prominent midfield role than what he has done in the past, particularly at the back end of the year. Hugh Boxall, Mitch Owens, Max Hall at times. There were just a lot of players that sort of rotated through that position, which from my perspective was different to previous seasons, and I probably wasn't expecting that last year. But the disappointment probably came from the Saints' inconsistency. Like they would often have some really good wins, but they'd followed up with some really poor losses, which no doubt frustrates the Saints faithful. And that's probably best highlighted in their incredible win over Melbourne in round 20, where they came from 46 points down at 3/4 time to steal the win right at the death, thanks to Nazaya and Romar's midfield brilliance. I'll put Romar's name in there too, because that play they drew up together where he kicked that to Wang while he was leading inside 50 was just incredible. One of the best things I've seen, I reckon. And in terms of their primetime fixtures, they have 2 primetime fixtures this season up to round 15, but they feature the 3rd most times in our FantasyBros Sunday Showdown with 8. So lock a few of those Saints boys into that competition straight away. In terms of their key under-22 players, again, as I mentioned, they had a bit of they introduced some new players last season, so they've still got a fair few players who are eligible for that competition. Hugh Boxall as a midfielder, Hugo Garcia also as a midfielder, Mateus Philippou, who's still eligible for that competition. He's a name we've spoken about the last couple of years. He's eligible as a forward, Alex Taru as a defender, Toby Travalia as a defender, and Darcy Wilson as well as a forward. In terms of those key outs, they had Zach Jones. He was delisted. Jack Steele traded to Melbourne, and Jimmy Webster retired. Their key ins, they really hit the trade market, didn't they? With Ross the boss as their footy boss, and list manager and CEO and whatever other role they gave him, social media manager, all that sort of stuff. So they brought Tom De Koning from Carlton as a ruckman, Sam Flanders from Gold Coast, Liam Ryan from West Coast, and Jack Silvani as Carlton. They really went bang, 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 didn't they? And notable position changes. They had Sam Flanders, who's picked up forward status this year, so he's going to be a great selection there in our forward lines. Bradley Hill is now a forward, and Mason Wood also a forward. What are your thoughts, mate, looking at that?
Look, other than it's Wang's world and we're just living in it, I think we need to look at those key ins. I think they are some very big ins that are potentially going to help the Saints move forward this season. Obviously, Tom De Koning has high expectations and is a very good ruckman in his own right to partner Rowan Marshall, and it's going to be interesting to see how that dynamic works, and no doubt we'll probably touch on that in a minute when we look at the CBAs. Sam Flanders coming across from Gold Coast, he was seeking more midfield time, and he's probably got it now that they've given up quite a little bit to get him, so he's going to have a bit of an expectation on him to perform and really change that midfield dynamic at Saints. And then obviously, Jack Silvani probably provides Callum Wilkie with some support at the defensive end of the ground as a key back. So I'm pretty positive about the Saints this year. I think they can bounce back well this year and probably look to finish in and around that borderline of finals, whether that's 9th or 10th. But yeah, I think other than Wanganeen Miller, who I think is the standout player for the Saints again this season, there are some very good picks for the Saints that are very good scorers in their own right. And one you've already kind of touched on as well, Mateus Philippou. I can't believe he's still 22. It seems like he's been in the competition for maybe 6 years. I feel like we've been talking about him every preseason as a person to target because of some injury-affected seasons and ability that he has. But yet he's still eligible for our under-22 competition, which I'm excited for, and I think we'll probably talk about that throughout the episode as well.
Yeah, in terms of St Kilda as well, I'm actually, I think around that 10th mark is probably where they are, maybe 10 to 12. I feel like I might be a little bit pessimistic when I talk about the Saints, just because when teams bring in so many new players, I feel like it takes a little while to gel. I'm just not convinced that this might be the season where we really see them charge towards finals. That, again, I know other people have other views, and maybe this might not actually happen, but I kind of feel that we might see a few teething issues this year. A few players might change roles throughout where they try to really find their perfect mix. And if they're really going to push towards finals, we may see that, in a 27, 28 sort of thing. But I don't know, that's probably my view, and it might differ to others, might be a bit pessimistic, but that's my sort of thing. But they're super fantasy relevant, and I really do like watching St Kilda play as well. They've got some really exciting players. And in terms of Sam Flanders, and you know what, this actually probably does lead us nicely into our key data for the Saints from 2025, which we can talk about. But just on Sam Flanders, like he averaged, having a look at that, 78.3 GES points last year. He's clearly going to put, a stack of points on top of that because he will play midfield. What do you think he can average in 2026?
Let's not go too much into him. Probably a little bit of a spoiler, but he's going to be my target player this season. So I'll deep dive into him after our St Kilda deep dive. So we'll get back to that later on.
I'll keep your secrets then. All right, talk me through your data.
All right, so 2025 data deep dive for the St Kilda Saints. We can see that Nasiah Wanganeen-Miller, the absolute star that he is in the competition, now the first $2 million player in the AFL, average was the highest fantasy market share with 72% of the Saints market share last season, followed closely by Rowan Marshall at 6.9%. And then his partner, Wanganeen-Miller's partner in crime, Jack Sinclair, the other halfback that is very GDS relevant for coaches again this season at 6.6% of their market share. Unfortunately, Jack Steele, their ex-skipper, did get traded, and he does leave a bit of a hole in their midfield and in their market share, which I think Sam Flanders will probably be looking to pick up. And then obviously some others as well, Jack McRae, who got traded across from the Bulldogs in the hope that he could fill a midfield void. Wyn Hager was used in a bit of a different role throughout the year, bit of midfield time and bit of wing time to finish the year. And then obviously Callum Wilkie, he's just an absolute star in that defensive line, and they're probably a little bit underrated within the competition, just basically for the pure fact that he doesn't have a whole lot of support down there in the key position stocks, and it's basically Callum Wilkie or bust for the Saints sometimes when he's trying to save the day against the big key forwards that the opposition's normally have. So I like Callum Wilkie as a player, and that 5.3% of the fantasy market share as the key defensive pillar for the Saints is pretty impressive. And then if we look at their CBA, so once again, Rowan Marshall at 82% CBAs last season, and then Jack Steele at 74% with the top two. It's going to be interesting to see how this dynamic with Tom De Koning coming across to the Saints this season. Obviously, Marshall did try and seek a trade and tried to get out of there during the trade period last season, and he tried to get to Geelong, and Geelong's offer just wasn't good enough for the Saints' liking. So Marshall, unfortunately, is probably stuck there, and he probably is going to play the second ruck role, which I think takes away his relevancy in GDS this season, especially in that ruck line, until we can get a bit of a clearer picture on what his role might look like. I have seen reports that he's been training in the defense when he's not in the ruck. I've seen reports that he's playing forward when he's not in the ruck. I've seen reports that, it's probably going to be based on whether Max King's fit or not, to whether he plays forward or back. So there's a lot of speculation about what his role might look like this season, and he's just someone that I'm not looking to touch with a 10-foot pole until I can see some either A, form, or B, a better role for him, because Tom De Koning has obviously come across as that big recruit who's on big money. He's going to be their starting ruckman just purely for his tap craft with these new rules this year. So interesting. Obviously, Jack Steele as well, as we mentioned, got traded. So there's a big hole there to be filled as the highest CBA attendance midfielder last season, followed by Jack McRae and Hugo Garcia at 67 and 52% respectively. And then obviously we can see there at number 6, Wanganeen-Miller had the 27% CBAs at the back end of the season, when the Saints were pretty much looking to experiment and try and get him involved in whatever aspect they could in the game, because obviously anytime the ball is in his hands, they have a better chance of winning. And obviously we saw him drift forward and impact the scoreboard, especially against Melbourne, and even against Geelong. He kicked a couple goals as well. So hopefully, once again, we can see that role continue this year. And obviously we can see another big year for the Wang. And then finally, with our kick-ins and play-ons, it was Jack Sinclair and Wanganeen Miller, and it's pretty much a rock, scissors, paper, rock to see who would get that out of those two, followed by Callum Wilkie all the way down at 21 kick-ins. So Sinclair had 123 and Wanganeen Miller had 94. And you pretty much guarantee not just Wanganeen Miller or Sinclair, that the St Kilda in general, whoever takes their kick-ins is going to play on. We can see on screen there that 7 out of their top 10 players averaged 100% play on percentage. So it is something that coaches will love to see, that Jack Sinclair is going to play on nearly 100% of the time and get those cheap points. I think we're going to see a reduction in Wanganeen Miller's kick-in percentages this year, especially if he has that midfield role, because they just can't have him all over the ground. They wish they had 23 Wanganeen Millers, but obviously they only have the one, and they just can't have him everywhere at once. So they might be looking to see who else could potentially takes their fair share of kick-ins there. Is there anything that really stands out to you, mate, outside of those points that I mentioned?
Well, there's a lot really, isn't there? Like, in terms of Desire Wanganeen Miller as well, those 27% CBAs, that you got to know they've come in the back part of the year. So really it was round 18 where it really started. He had 43%, and then it went 79, 60, 83, 32, 80, 67. And prior to that, there were only really probably 2 or 3 games before round 18 where he was really in there a bit. So yeah, that 27%, just know that came at the back half of the year, and it's likely to continue this year. And I don't care where he plays, play him anywhere. He is just the thirstiest player when it comes to scoring fantasy points. He will take that little kick, he'll run past and get the handball, he'll get another kick, he'll run past again, he'll push out into space. He's the closest thing to being untaggable that I think you can get. But I do also think that teams are going to try and figure out a way to stop him this year. They have to. I'm just, it's probably a question of, is that something they're wanting to do against the Saints? The other thing, Rowan Marshall, it's disappointing, isn't it? I was shaking my head before because Ross Lyon, Rowan Marshall is one of the best ruckmen in the competition. And yes, Tom DeConning, I can see where they're coming from and why they want him. But it's just going to mean it's likely that Rowan Marshall's irrelevant for us for a big chunk of this season, unless he gets that number 1 roll back or there's something that happens to TDK. So we'll have to wait and see there. And Cal Wilkie, I love that shout too. He gets his scoring when he gets really high marks across halfback through that intercept marking game. So I think, if there's matchups where he's going to be able to get some of those intercept marks, you definitely target him if you can.
Yeah, perfect. I think that leads us pretty nicely into our target players for the 2026 season for the Saints. Do you want to talk about why you are keen on that guy that we talked about a little bit earlier, in Matthias Philippou?
Absolutely. They really struggled with their poo last year, didn't they, the Saints? And by poo, I mean Matthias Philippou. So get your mind out of the gutter there, Haz. But in all seriousness, that was the main challenge last year, wasn't it, with Philippou? He just couldn't quite get any consistency going at all after what was such a promising finish to that 2024 season, where he was running through the midfield and he was busting out some huge score for his GDS coaches. And here are his last 4 scores from that 24 season, just for those who may have forgotten or may not have been aware or may have just joined GDS, last season or this year. They were 141, 109, 113, and 133. So absolutely crazy. And again, he builds those scores in so many ways because he's thrown in the midfield and he gets the license to push forward just purely based off his talent and how dynamic he is. His CBAs in those games as well, they were 63%, 68%, 57%. And then oddly enough, that last game where he went 133, it was off 0% time in the midfield. So that probably speaks to his ability if he can still put up a massive score off forward time alone. But then again, he was in some white hot form from memory that season. And he was one of the, the big names who were talking about heading into 2025. But speaking of 2025, he could only manage an average of 41.6 GDS points from 9 games, and only Dan Butler, Liam Henry, and Alex Dodson put up lower averages last season. So it was not the year that he or the Saints had in mind, unfortunately. But again, this season, that season he was just cruel by his injuries. And how can you forget those scenes where, he pinged his calf 2 minutes before the bounce of the ball, and he spoke to Ross Lyon on the phone to let him know, and he was just in tears. Like, I genuinely felt for the bloke. And you hate to see injuries in our sport to any player, let alone one with as much talent as the Pooh. But yeah, with all that in mind, he still managed a couple okay scores in rounds 9 and 11 with 82 GDS points in both rounds. But more importantly, he's had a really strong preseason with no new injuries reported. And in match simulation, he's actually playing predominantly midfield with small stints at half forward. And by all reports and all those track watches out on X, he's absolutely dominating. So let's hope it stays this way, because he's firming as a great pick for our under-22 forward lines. And to be fair, probably for some standard competitions as well, if he can stay fit and get that time around the ball.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I just can't believe he's still eligible for under 22. It just seems like, we've been talking about this injury interrupted or injury prone player for a couple of seasons now in the Pooh. And you're right, his talent is unquestionable. He has a big frame. Seems to be building nicely. And yes, he did have a down year last year, but like you highlighted with his 2024 numbers, he certainly knows how to put a score on the board, and he certainly knows how to rack up points, even if it doesn't actually correlate to midfield time. So, yeah, I think for the under-22 competition, he is the perfect play there. Obviously, there's no real risk with a player that has that upside in a field that probably you're looking at more lower scores. So anyone that can, crack a ton consistently, let alone in 4 games in a row, just shows that they have the scoring pedigree that we're going to be looking to target. So definitely love that shout. I don't know I'll be touching him in standard competitions, not until I see that average kind of get up around that 100 mark. But obviously it does help that he does have forward status in GDS. So who knows, probably one for primetime fixtures and maybe the Sunday showdowns. There's a little bit of a pod there based on averages, because I don't think a lot of coaches will be looking to target him in those games. But that does bring me to my target player for the 2026 season, and that is the player that has come across from the Suns, and that is Sam Flanders. And obviously, as I mentioned, St Kilda showed just how highly they rated him with giving up the 2 first-round selections to get the deal done over the off-season. He arrives at the Saints after a career low average of the 78.3 GDS points last season that you mentioned, Pitty, where he never really looked fully fit or settled despite playing the 20 games. He averaged just 8 kicks, 10 handballs, 3.5 marks, and 2 tackles per game. And that with the additions of John Noble and Dan Rioli in the 2024 trade period, Flanders was really left without a clear role in that Suns lineup in 2025. And he shuffled around the ground and was used primarily on the wing and half forward. His midfield use probably tells the story. He had 13 games with CBAs, but his highest CBA share was just 41%. And he recorded 8 games with under 15% CBAs, highlighting how little he was required in that Suns midfield with the likes of Rao, Anderson, Miller, Humphrey, just to name a few. So we know the ceiling is elite. Flanders averaged the 127.5 GDS points in his breakout year to finish as the 8th best player overall in a season where he was seen to be the best ball user. And that was in the 2024 season. He was thrown to halfback during that season, and he certainly managed to make GDS coaches happy. In comparison to his 2025 numbers, his 2024 season averages are off the charts, racking up disposals at will, where he managed to average 17 kicks, 13.5 handballs, 5.5 marks, and 2 tackles, showcasing an elite ability to rack up across all scoring lines, especially, with his disposals averaging 30 touches in a season is pretty impressive. He now moves to the Saints, where he will be one of the main midfield pieces in 2026. And alongside that positional change from a midfielder to a forward in GDS, he shapes as a genuine cheat code that coaches absolutely love to have those midfielders available to be plugged in our forward line. So as that forward eligible player spending the majority of his time through the midfield, that's exactly what we want to see and exactly what we love. And once again, from all reports, his preseason has been really strong, and he looks fit, confident, and ready to explode at the Saints in 2026. And with his upside and proven scoring pedigree, I'll be locking him into my forward line, I think, for most weeks, and backing him to bounce back in a big way this season. yes, I also understand that it might be a bit of an adjustment period coming over to a new side and having that big expectation on his shoulders to carry the load and come in and take over Jack Steele's numbers that he vacated in the off season. But I think come, round 5, we're going to be really looking to target him for the rest of the season once he warms up to his new club and his new colours and his new role at the Saints.
Yeah, he's a great shout. Those numbers you rattled off before from that down year last year, 8 kicks, 10 handballs, 3.5 marks and 2 tackles. They're just not Sam Flanders numbers, are they? The ones you mentioned after from his 2024 season, they're the numbers we know for Sam Flanders with 17 kicks on average, and just can score in so many ways as well. But I just find it interesting what their midfield's going to look like. Like Sam Flanders clearly comes in, doesn't he? And you'd imagine he takes that Jack Steele market share of the CBAs. But does Jack McRae, does he still go through there? Like he surely does, right? Because you've got Wang, you've got Flanders. You would imagine it's McRae, but then they've also got they'll want to get Philippou through there, like we sort of talked about. They got Hugo Garcia, Marcus Windhager, Hugh Boxall, Max Hall, Mitch Owens at times. Like there's just a lot of players that could go through that. I'm a little bit is why the Saints can be hard sometimes to pick is what they might actually end up doing.
Well, I think that comes down to Ross, the boss. Obviously, we know he's the coach, he's the list manager, he's the everything at St Kilda. But you just know what. Yeah, we just don't know what curveballs he's going to throw up from game to game. Like he'll throw a spanner in the works, and a player that will have 80% CBAs for the season, and all of a sudden he'll get hooked or dropped for absolutely no reason. And Jack McRae is probably one of those players that cops a little bit of the Ross wrath at sometimes, and does fall under fire. Obviously, he did come across from the Bulldogs hoping to change the way that their midfield played, and I don't think he kind of met expectations last year. So it will be interesting to see. I think Wanganeen Miller has been training as obviously their primary midfielder this season alongside Flanders, and I think it's got to be a mix of all those names you just rattled off between either a Hugo Garcia, a Jack McRae, a Marcus Windhager if they want a bigger body in there, or someone if they're looking to tag, and then probably any one of those ones that can run through. So will be interesting, but I don't think I see Jack McRae on the outers. I definitely think he's in their best 23 players at the club, and he is an on-baller, so I'll back him in to have that role, and it could be a good shout for coaches this season.
Now, mate, that brings us to the end of our St Kilda team preview and the end of our 5th preview show. However, before we end, it's time for our favourite part of the show, our pack opening game. So at the end of every preview show, we're going to open a 9-player rare all-star pack. And if any players from the 3 teams we previewed in this episode are pulled, or anyone from the previous 3 teams, they'll go into the giveaway pool. So today, if any Power, Tigers, Saints, Kangaroos, Demons, or Hawks are pulled, they will go straight into the giveaway pool. To enter the giveaway and have a chance at winning player cards, just simply subscribe to the Fantasy Bros YouTube page, like the video, and comment who your MVP is for that particular preview show. That means you can have up to 6 entries in the giveaway by the end of the preseason team preview shows. All winners will be drawn in our first live round preview on the 4th of March before the season commences, which I am absolutely pumped for.
All right, on screen, mate, we can see that we have our 9-player rare all-star pack. Can you see that on screen?
I can see that on screen. I can also see if you had a team name change, have you?
I have had a team name change, yes, I have. I had a change across all competitions, and I am now Has No Mercy. Just for a bit of consistency across the board, I just found I wasn't really loving my team names. Just with the variety that I had, I tried to tailor them all to different competitions and sports, and just wasn't really loving it. It made it really hard to, work across the Discord and organize trades. So for some consistency now, I am just going to go with Has No Mercy across our major competitions. Keep an eye on that one on the transfer market. If anyone is looking for cards or sees a trade up there from me, that would definitely help one of the Fantasy Bros out, that's for sure.
Yeah, keep an eye on the leaderboards. I'm glad you didn't say Has No Diamonds, because that would not be true.
I would definitely be telling a lie, that is for sure. Should have said Has No Sheezels.
Yeah, that's a lie as well. And you know it. Now rip that pack. All right, what do we got?
Alrighty. We've got some golds. Oh, we've got a plat there. Another plat there. All right, so we've got 2 plats, all golds. What row would you like, mate?
Go middle again. I won't change tactics this week.
Middle. Let's go something different. We'll go from right to left this time.
Yeah.
We've got a Kurt Warner.
Carl Warner, isn't it?
Carl Warner, is it? There we go. Jeremy Sharp.
Won't be playing him.
Yeah, no, he won't be playing. There you go. I don't even know his name, so it doesn't show that how fantasy relevant he is. We got a Mark Keane plat there, so no giveaway cards just yet. We have a Joel Hamling, so that is going into the giveaway. Well, no, it's not. Never mind. Mind me, it is not going into the giveaway pool.
Not yet.
Joel Frazier, there we go. One for our under 22 competition that I'm sure we will talk about.
Maybe in the next episode.
Thomas from Gold Coast, I think he's one of their draftees from this year. Sam Berry from Adelaide Crows. Mason Cox from Fremantle. And then finally, our platinum is a Jack Higgins. So that is going into the giveaway pool, a plat Jack Higgins to round out our pack for this week. So only the 1 card into the giveaway pool. I think we still have some pretty good cards in that giveaway pool, and I think Pitty and I are going to add to that giveaway pool over the coming episodes, and we'll keep you updated with what's in that across our Discord stages as well.
Absolutely. We'll make sure there's some good stuff in there, and it'd be something that you want to definitely get into.
100%. But that does bring us to an end of our 5th team preview series. And a reminder for new users who are still looking to sign up, when registering using the promo code FBAR26 in all capital letters, you will get 3 9-player common packs. And as a bit of a spoiler, we will be dropping the first ever Aussie Rules fantasy textbook in the next couple of weeks. The textbook will be your preseason guide to everything Game Day Squad Aussie Rules. So make sure you keep an eye on all socials for the release date. And that's going to include all our team MVPs, our young guns, our pods, and our fades for the 2026 season, with a little bit of write-up, as well as some matchup data as well for some data nerds out there as well. So keep an eye on that. It'll be out in the for coming week or weeks. It will be dropping very shortly. And our team preview shows will drop every Monday and Thursday on the Fantasy Bros YouTube, Apple Music, and Spotify pages. Don't forget to like and subscribe across all of our socials to keep up to date via @FantasyBrosAU on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Apple Music, and Spotify. As always, Pitty, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure previewing these 3 teams with you. We've got 1 to go before we start to get into some rankings episodes as well, which I can't wait for.
Absolutely. I can't wait for that either. That's going to be one that I'm really looking forward to. It's a long preseason, though. I can't wait to just get in and, as they say, play a few games. So, mate, thanks again for an awesome show.
Thank you. Thanks, listeners. Have a great night, and we will see you for our next team preview show, which will be our 6th installment and final in our team preview series. Have a good night, and thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode by the Fantasy Bros. If you want to show your support, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this show on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. Also, make sure you check us out on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Just search @FantasyBros AU.